up for our next fireside chat, and I'm going to welcome Tony Barthel, who's our senior curator at the National Zoo. Previously, he curated many of our major exhibits: Asia Trail, Elephant Trails, Africa, Cheetah Conservation Station, and he's been at this business for over 30 years and at the National Zoo since 2002. So.
Thanks, Mel. Yeah, so hi, everybody. I am Tony Barthel. As Mel said, I've been doing this for, I guess, was it like 93? I think I started at my first zoo job. It was love at first pile of poop there. As I grew a little bit in the field, I started developing an interest in expanding my knowledge. And like everybody else, I read journals. I sucked up every show I could find. I went to conferences and I started developing my own little set of heroes in the field. Then fast forward, it was 2002. My wife and I were expecting our first son, and she excitedly comes to me with a job posting for the National Zoo. It was a curator position. I guess it was actually called an assistant curator at the time, but she convinced me to apply, and somehow I fooled the National Zoo into giving me that job, and started here right at the end of that year. And I was thrilled to start here. One of the things I didn't realize in coming to the National Zoo, and that's what it was called then, now it's Smithsonian National Zoo and Conservation Biology Institute. But one of the things I didn't realize was the opportunity I would have to have so many of those heroes of mine now become colleagues. And I had people that I would text on a regular basis who were people that I saw in conferences, and I read their journals, and I was just really excited to have this personal relationship with. In fact, if the contact list in your cell phone was a measure of success, I'd have been a superstar. Unfortunately, that's not how it works. But through that contact, through those relationships, a lot of opportunities for me opened up. I was able to travel with Peter and also with Steve Montfort on 2 different trips to Malaysia. I was able to travel with Buddha to India on a training program. I went with Suzanne Murray and James Hassel to Kenya on a rhino program. All of these were incredible opportunities for me to get a chance to work with my colleagues, see them doing just amazing things in the field. But one of the things that really stood out to me was the number of people I would encounter that had taken their journey through this facility here on their way to wherever they were. They no longer worked for the National Zoo, they no longer worked for NZCBI, but they had an experience here, they had a background here. And I was taken by that, and I have often wondered what it is about this place that leads to so much innovation, so much capacity building, and so much impact. And so I'm excited to introduce a panel of people who are the true superstars who can come here and tell us a little bit about their experience. Each one can introduce themselves, and I hope through the questions you all have and their story, we can explore a little bit about what makes this place so special. So with that, I'd like to invite Peter, Dajun, Boripat, Fernanda, and Erica. Yeah, let's move that. I can get you all to do
Testing.
Yeah, and then when we're asked questions, I'll try to repeat them, and then we'll go through. Pete, if you want to start.
Sure. Well, congratulations, everybody. 50 years is nothing to shake a stick at. That's pretty impressive. It's hard enough to stay alive 50 years. 50 years to keep something like this going and growing in the way it's happened is quite amazing. So I'm Pete Marra. I came to the Smithsonian in 1999. I was at CERC when I started out my career. Was there for about 5 years, and then shifted over to the zoo, Smithsonian Migratory Bird Center, NZCBI, where I stayed for another 15 years. So I was at the Smithsonian for 20 total years, fantastic years. I mean, it's just such an amazing experience when I think back on it. And, you know, when I was asked to sort of reflect for 3 minutes, probably ought to use a minute and a half, I was really torn on what I was going to talk about. And I started to think about it. And it occurred to me that, you know, we can measure success in a variety of ways. And we think about saving species as the ultimate thing that we do. But if we think about some of the conceptual advances that we've made in our various papers and things, it's quite amazing. And when you think about how we sort of came to a conclusion or advanced a particular theory that has then been used multiple times over and over again to successfully breed species in captivity or understand a particular mechanism that might be driving and might be fundamental to how we understand population dynamics. These are all fundamental building blocks for how we save species, for how we do our conservation. It's really, really amazing. One of those is that I was sort of, my group really contributed to and was a really big part of what we did at the Smithsonian was something called seasonal interactions. We did this with birds. We used American redstart as a primary species, but we did it with a bunch of different species. And basically what the idea is that where you've been matters. And so that events throughout the annual cycle or throughout your life cycle drive a lot of the dynamics that we see. So if you're a migratory bird and you go to some place like Jamaica, or you go to Colombia where the habitat's been destroyed or the climate's not going so well, that could influence the number of young you raise back up on breeding areas, thousands of miles, hey Brandy, thousands of miles up on the breeding grounds. And so when you think about the conservation of a particular species, you need to think about these events throughout the entire annual cycle. That was fundamental, and that's influenced a lot of important things in the conservation, not just of birds, but of many, many organisms. And so that was quite important. And I'm going to work this into a metaphor. And so shift back just 2 weeks ago, I get an email from a kid by the name of Keith. We'll call him Keith because that's his name. And Keith writes me and says, "You may not remember me, but you did a video about me back in 2015. And I started thinking about this. And so, yeah, it was Johnny Gibbons and I. Remember Johnny Gibbons? Johnny was at the zoo. And we were putting on a little conference. We did several events at the zoo on this in 2016, but we had all these sort of videos like that in the beginning, not quite as good as that, in the beginning. And Johnny knew this little kid who lived up on Cape Cod, who was 8 years old at the time. Just an amazing, amazing birder. He was just so passionate about birds, reminded me of myself when I was a kid and a lot of the geeky folks in the Migratory Bird Center and other folks that we know. And so we did a video on him and hadn't heard from him. And then a week ago, he writes me and goes, "Pete, I'd like to apply to your program at Georgetown. We created a new Bachelor's of Science in Environment Sustainability. And I'm coming down and I'm actually going to see Keith tomorrow. I haven't heard from him in 10 years, but it really spoke to me about the power of education and how important that is. It's one of the reasons I moved to academia, was to create degrees, to try to change people's lives, to try to train the next generation in more formal and informal ways, much like we do and you do here, and you've done so well for so many years. And it's one of the magical things about the Smithsonian. One of the things I'll always take away and always think fondly of things that happen at the zoo. People like you, one of my favorite things to do at the zoo was always to kind of do the duty station on Saturdays or Sundays and hang out with the curators. But that is such a powerful piece of conservation. So it may not be saving species, but it's saving people in ways that they may not even be aware of.
Yeah, we'll just go right down the list.
Okay. Hello, I'm Dajun. I'm a wildlife guy from Peking University, China. And I've been a lucky guy to be a wildlife guy. And I've been lucky to start it with wild giant panda. That's how I connect with Smithsonian. The first time I came to this campus was 25 years ago, and just in this season. So 1 year before that, I got to know Bill from a giant panda workshop in China. And then right after I arrived here, I got to know Mel and Peter. And Bill put me into the GIS lab, which is very close to Peter. So I got a person who I can ask questions. And Peter gave me a lot of help on my remote sensing work by that time. Then after that, I worked with Bill on lots of the training courses, which Bill mentioned this morning. So we worked on first is several GIS training courses, and then black bear and camera trapping. So we trained hundreds of the reserve staffs together. But for me, the most important part, or the most important help from Bill, the first one is he trained a lot of young young students. So I will name some of them. So first is Li Sheng. Maybe some of you get very familiar with. And Li Sheng and his wife, Xiaoli, after they got their PhD from Peking University, they came here. But Li Sheng got trained since his last year in the undergraduate the undergraduate school, and trained by Bill. So we have been working together for so many years. Now Li Sheng is an associate professor with Peking University, one of the influenced researcher on wildlife in China. And Li Sheng's wife, we call her Xiaoli, now is a full professor with Chinese Academy of Sciences, still working on the biodiversity. And then I want to mention Liu Fang. Liu Fang, I think she was regarded as the best black bear biologist in China, now working with Chinese Academy of Forest. So, and Liu Fang came back later on to this campus with her son, right? And spent some time here. And another one I want to mention is Zhang Lu, or we call her Lulu. Lulu also spent years here. Now she is associate professor in Zhongshan or Sun Yixin University in the southern China. And now she's working on the river otters in China. So we have other students like Hong Liang. He's still working with me on my snow leopard project now. So I would like to say, another one is my wife, Xiaojian. Actually, yeah, I won't forget. Xiaojian came to the zoo in 1995, working with Abra on the wild panda vocalization. So actually, Xiaojian was Abra's student. And so we have now we have a WeChat group. The name is Bill's China Team, with many students. So in this aspect, I would like to say that Bill may deserve a big award on training the young Chinese scientists. Yeah, during the past 20 years. And I'm so glad to learn that Bill just told me that he has planned to have more students coming in the next 2 years. So please keep doing that, Bill, and please keep doing that, Peter and Mel. So actually, it's my great pleasure to come here to celebrate the 50 years of the NZCBI. And I'm not here only by myself. I'm here for the whole Bill's China team. And also, I should bring the greeting from my professor, Pan Wenshi. Professor Pan is one of the leading wildlife scientists in China, and this year he's going to 89 in a month. So, but he's still very active in China, and one of his most important work is on the wild panda. So we published a book on the wild giant panda in China, in Chinese, and it was Bill and the Smithsonian generated the money, helped to translate that book into English and edited it, and finally published in English by the Smithsonian Press. So Professor Pan, my professor, is always very grateful for this to Bill and to the NZCBI. So, yeah. Thank you.
All right. It's great to be here. Again, just like Linda and others said, this is it used to be a home for me because I came all the way from Thailand and spent 5.5 years here doing my PhD. And I was Buddha's first PhD student. So we came into the Department of Reproductive Science at DRS. So I came from the past as well. So I'm going to use a lot of old terms, CRC and all that stuff. All right. So I quit my job as a teaching professor at the university in Bangkok. I sold my car. I only have like $7,000 to come here, and part of the GMU Smithsonian program with Elizabeth Freeman and some other friends. And then, of course, the first thing I did was pay tuition out of state rate. That's like half of the money I had. So then Buddha took good care of me. So I was able to live in DC area and Virginia. And then at George Mason, I think I had a very good friend. One of them is Tom Wood, and another peace of mind sanctuary for me. And a great mentor was Lee Talbot. So I took many classes from him, learning about biodiversity values and conservation planning and other stuff. And over here in Front Royal, I have my elves deer because this is a species that are extinct in the wild in Thailand. So it took me years to talk to Dave Will and Steve Montfort and Buddha and say, hey, I want to come here for the PhD because I was inspired by all the publications. In the 90s, there were not much of internet, World Wide Web. It's just journals. In the library, in the vet school, I skimmed through the journal fertility, JRF and IETS and all that, SSR and other stuff. It's all about Howard, Wilt, Bush, Wemmer, Rawls, and some of these names, and it kept popping up over and over again from many species of the wildlife. So I thought to myself that if I were to do a PhD, it has to be this team and this team only. And then after a while, after they decided to take me on, they sent me a one-way ticket, but it's a business class British Airways. It was pretty fancy. It's pretty convincing to come, but I have no choice whether I would go home or not. But I never have a plan to get a job or work in the US. I know exactly what I want. I was 30 years old when I came here. I went home when I was 35, and the next week I didn't take vacation. I never have a degree. The PhD diploma has been mailed to me 2 years after that. I wasn't even sure I graduated. But anyway, the greatest part I'd like to tell you is that, again, the question that Mel shared in my email saying that, what is the great thing about this place? I think, first of all, it's about the diversity and the peers and the scientists, the senior scientists I used to have a chance to work with. The greatest thing for me is that I was a very few people, I think, that not only that I was assigned to work with Buddha, I got a chance to work with Beck Spindler and Joe Gale and Janine and Mitch and Dave. And because I came from Thailand, we go back to work on some projects. So I got a chance to work with mostly all the senior scientists under the DRS team. And then I have many, many friends from Maryland, from GMU, from other schools. So the friends and the peers, that was the great part, the supporting part of my life to keep me sane, because Buddha was very hard on the science part. Boripat, you need to finish this 40,000 sperm tomorrow, that kind of stuff. But I had these great friends, and one of them is here, Ed Smith here, and many other friends that took me bird watching and herping, looking for salamanders, and Tom also taught me a lot bird watching. So I learned a lot about natural history of the East Coast, and I went to do a lot of things in Hawk Mountain, studying migration, going to Shenandoah, looking at box turtle telemetry, befriended with Tom Arkwright with his wood turtle study site. So that part was actually kept me sane and allowed me to go through all other hard science training. And once I graduated, I think I cultivated a lot of friendship, and then I befriended with Nuch came from Thailand as well. Pierre came from France, and we were doing as a great team together. So since 2001, then I came here until now, 2025. So I was a part of this 50-year journey. At least I have been at least half of the journey with you guys. And then when I returned home, I got a job at the Zoological Park organization until I quit. So I worked there for 12 and a half years. And sitting there in Bangkok, the SCBI guys always showed up. So I felt like I never left this place. And you know, that everybody came. Janine came there, and then Nuch came, and then Buddha came to work on the tape here, and a lot of stuff is happening all the time. So I felt like I never really disconnected from this place. And that was actually a great part, and I kept sending more younger generations to be trained, partly like internships or 6 months visits, or Pierre and Buddha were sitting on the PhD committee on the following generations after I finished. So I think it's been a very good, healthy, at least 30 years relationships, even before my generation. The Zoological Park Organization of Thailand has worked with Chris Wemmer, has worked with Steve Monfort since 93, and also Bill McShay, because Steve and Bill worked a lot on the elves deer, and they kept publishing stuff in the early 90s. So when I search elves deer paper, it's all Monfort, McShay, and other people. So I think I have actually come from like a dreaming about being in this place, getting to know all the name on the papers, put the name and the face together, befriended with them, and became lifetime partners and collaborators. And then the last thing I'd like to reflect is that I would love to see something like this happening since 2000, 2001. I always compare this place maybe with WCS or Bronx Zoo. Could be a zoo-based conservation. How can we actually scaling up the impacts? I think because at least Smithsonian is a government agency. So of course, it's a lot of strength and a lot of liability. And sometimes there's also limitations. When you got budget cuts, it was quite shocking, especially for me coming over, uprooting my life to come here, and then 4 months after I started, they're going to close this place down. It was quite a shocking history in the 2001, and of course we have fought through that. And as a part of an Asian graduate student, we didn't know much about the politics behind, you know, the whole reason to close this place down. But the strength and the science and the value of this place show that it's so important. The previous session asked about the connection to the land. I also had a great time here, even though I was placed downtown, go to school in the evening in Mason, come out here to do my elves deer research in the breeding season. So I got to learn all about the DC, Virginia, Maryland, Delaware Peninsula, migratory birds. I hang out with friends in Pete's lab. So I had a very, very good time. And I hope there will be more people like myself that came through here, get trained, go back, and then try to elevate the capacity of zoo-based conservation, that we embrace on both shoulders. Research and conservation, we need to both publish and get the baby animals born on, and then that kind of thing is really a great value, and it's actually now become part of my DNA, that every time I try to mentor and coach the younger generation, I try to embrace both value of research and also conservation. Thank you.
Hello. So my name is Fernanda Abra. I'm a biologist from Brazil, and I have a PhD in applied ecology, and currently I'm a postdoc fellow from CCS under the leadership of Alfonso Alonso. So I'm very interested to understand the impacts of roads and traffic on wildlife in Brazil. And also I advise for mitigation measures to reduce the impacts of fragmentation and also road mortality on wildlife. Now I'm leading a project called Reconnecta. So we use artificial canopy bridges in a form of a solution to reduce fragmentation on Amazon rainforest caused by roads or other forms of linear infrastructure. But also canopy bridges can reduce the impacts of road mortality. In 2019, I came to SCBI for the first time. So Ricardo Stanos brought me here for the first time, and I was amazed about this place and the people working here. I remember Ricardo was showing all the places and introducing me to people, and I was like, wow, this is a huge infrastructure. Look the wonderful work they do here. And then I met Peter, I met Jared. I was being introduced to people that was working with pandas and elephants in Africa, people working with conservation in Asia. And I was so amazed with the wonderful work they were doing here that I was thinking, oh my God, I want to live here because this is the mecca of conservation, right? And also I have a nice picture on the conservation drive. And I was telling people, oh, they have a street inside their campus called Conservation Drive, Research Drive. And after in the same week that I came to SCBI for the first time, we had meetings at the office where the CCS works. And for the first time, I met Alfonso and Tremi that is there. And I was presenting what I was doing in Brazil, the thing about the mitigation measures on roads and etc. And I was presenting my new project that was going to use canopy bridges to benefit tree-dwelling species. And I remember Tremi said, oh, this is exactly what we want to do. So very nice things that you're doing in Brazil. Let's continue to talk. And then I became a fellow from the CCS. And it's been a great pleasure to work with this wonderful team for more than 4 years. The project I started with a proposal like this big, and the project was going and going, and we collected wonderful data, but much more than this. I think we can say that we are making conservation in practice. So I think this is aligned with the mission from SCBI. What is, I think it's unique from SCBI is the cutting edge science in combination of practice conservation, right? Conservation in practice. And this is exactly what we want to do with Reconnecta. We want to do science-based conservation, save species on the ground, reduce the impacts of roads and traffic on these arboreal species that we're working with. And we also have another component that is totally aligned with the values of SCBI, that is the community engagement. So we work together with people in the 3 study areas that we have now. One of them, Ellie told you about the indigenous community that we work with in the Amazon. And I think this is one of the best parts of the project, was to go on their territory, to hear about their problems, like they hate to see animals being roadkilled on a federal highway that goes through their territory. And we worked together to literally build and install solutions to reduce the problem of fragmentation and road mortality. So we were building and installing together 32 artificial canopy bridges. And that's it. It's a great pleasure to work here. And also with the great people that we have in CCS, all the support that Peter, Alfonso, Tremi, all the CCS team gives to me and to the project. I have the right tools to do a good work in Brazil. So I think the other unique thing about Smithsonian, as we saw today, is our conservation projects. They are complete. They are based on science. We do the community engagement. We have cutting edge science, technologies, methods. So we have the complete thing about a conservation project.
Hi, my name is Eric Dinnerstein. Let's see. I'm chief scientist at an innovative NGO called Conservation X Labs. It just started only 5 months ago. And before that, I spent 11 years at a nonprofit called Resolve, where I was head scientist. And then before that, 25 years as chief scientist of World Wildlife Fund. But the real highlight of my career, in some ways the most fun, was a 5-year postdoc with the Smithsonian through Front Royal with my mentor, Chris Wemmer, where I took over the field program in Nepal studying tigers and rhinos. And the insights I have about Smithsonian and why it's such a spectacular place is because they attracted the giants in our field that everybody wanted to go study with and who touched so many people. Mine actually goes back to 1975, and I had just finished my undergrad. I had a degree in biology. It took me a long time to get it, but I didn't know much of what I was doing. But then I decided on a lark to apply for the Peace Corps because a friend of mine had done that, had been a teacher in Chad, and I thought that was really exciting. It was either that or go fishing in Alaska or hitchhike across South America, do something exciting. And I thought that, this is where luck comes into your career. As I applied, and I thought I was going to go to the country of Colombia to study pests on grain crops, the species of dove. Smithsonian had entered in 1975 a program with the Peace Corps to ostensibly identify students who had a degree in biology and knew something, and then put them in national parks. It was the era when national parks were expanding greatly around the world. And I got the packet from the Peace Corps, and I opened it up, and I saw that I was going to the Kingdom of Nepal. And I thought, oh, I just won the biological lottery. But I knew enough biogeography that I thought I was going to Nepal. I was finishing my undergrad at Western Washington University, and I love mountain climbing. I loved the idea of the Himalayas, and I thought I'm going to go to the Khumbu area and live with Sherpas and study snow leopards and never return. And then I opened the packet and I saw pictures of tigers and elephants and crocodiles. And I knew enough biogeography. They don't live in the Himalayas. And so I was being sent to a part of Nepal that most people don't know about called the lowland jungles of the Terai. The Terai is a monsoonal habitat. This is where humidity was invented. And it's really the jungle of Rudyard Kipling. And so I was just ecstatic. I didn't know what I was going to be doing. And so confession here is the only book I ever stole from a library, I eventually returned it, was George Schaller's classic, The Deer and the Tiger, written in 1967, where he spent a year studying tigers in Kana Tiger Reserve. And I took that and I decided, I don't know that much, so I'm going to just start a correspondence with people. And there's one person in particular I really admired was John Eisenberg, the founder of DZR, and really the leading mammologist of his time. And in 1975, 1980, if you wanted to study with the best people, you wanted to come to DZR, the Department of Zoological Research. That was the Mecca. Or go work with George Schaller. And so I decided to start corresponding. So I wrote to John Eisenberg, I wrote to George Schaller, I wrote to Dan Jansen, and they were all really kind and wrote back to me. And I had a 2-year correspondence with these people who had never met me, but who were just giants in the field. And there was this other guy too, named Chris Wemmer, who will come into the story in a second. When I finished a master's degree, so I went to Nepal, studied the prey species of tigers, came back, and I wanted to go back to Nepal or Asia or somewhere. I thought, oh, Chris Wemmer is a great contact because he's worked in Asia. And I started working with him and started corresponding and tried to find a dissertation. It didn't work out. Ended up going to OTS in Costa Rica, studying tropical fruit bats, but my passion for Asia never left. And so I was on my way back from Costa Rica, and Chris said, we're going to host a symposium on the biology and conservation of the Cervidae, the deer family. Why don't you come and give a presentation on your work on the prey species of tigers? I was honored and shocked that he would ask me, but I came here, and there's always a trait that's good to have is if you know you're in close proximity to somebody really famous. And so this was over at the auditorium over here where the conference was held, and I'm in the men's room. I'm at the urinal, and a sixth sense told me, just look over here and see if you can see the name tag of this guy without, a distinguished looking gentleman, without sort of seeming like a creep. And I look over and I just saw the first word, George. And then it wasn't until after we were done and washed our hands and I came full face is George Schaller. It's like, oh my God, there he is in person. And we started talking and he remembered me, of course, and he was so generous of his time. And then there was John Eisenberg, and then there was John Seidensticker, and then there was Ulas Karant, and then there was all these luminaries, and I was right there. And that's one of the wonderful things of this place is it thrusts you in the presence of extraordinary biologists. Just as I feel like back then, this was the place to be for a budding mammologist, conservation biologist. They didn't have conservation biology back then, but listening to the presentations today, I felt the same thing, that what a great group of scientists that Peter and Bill and others have recruited, and Mel, to come here and really lead the next generation of conservation biologists doing such important work. And listening to the presentations too, about the Northern Great Plains. So one of the things that, one quick anecdote, so just let me say two things that I love the most about Smithsonian. And I think that Chris Wemmer, more than anybody, really imbued this spirit, is in 1986, we did the first ever translocation of greater one-horned rhinos from one reserve, Chitwan, where I was working, to Bardia, where I used to work. And now the population of greater one-horned rhinos is like cresting to over 5,000. It's one of the few rhino species that are truly recovering. Our work on tigers, I think you can trace back the doubling of the world's tiger population to the initial work of Smithsonian, starting with John Seidensticker, following with Mel Sundquist, Dave Smith, and then Hemanta Mishra and myself. Others came on. But it was this commitment that to rewilding before rewilding was ever a word. And we called it restoration, but I really believe that the essence of what people here do that you bring to the world like nobody else is rewilding. And you should continue to do that. I think the work in the Northern Great Plains is very much like that, like we saw in the video. I think that as we look forward, and the things that you want to do going forward is address the critical problems we have in conservation, the threats that we face for extinction, and I see four major themes that we really have to focus on. One is preserving rarity, which is some of what you do already. Another is representation of all habitats. The third is reconnecting, what you just described. And the fourth is rewilding, which I think is a critical part of what you do. I'll just end with this story that about 25 years ago, when I was at World Wildlife Fund, I was on this round the world jet trip that they stuck me on for WWF alumni and Harvard alums. And it was 13 places in 23 days and all these great spots to go. And one of them was the African Serengeti. And I showed a slide on the jet. I gave lectures before we went to these places. And I showed a slide that had this barren landscape with just grass in the background. You couldn't see anything. And then I showed another one of where we were going in the Serengeti with, 40 different species of antelope and, incredible wildlife. And I said, which habitat had the most large mammal biomass 200 years ago? This godforsaken place that somewhere in eastern Montana, or this place, the Serengeti? And of course, it was a trick question that 200 years ago, it was the Northern Great Plains. With the bison, the elk, the pronghorn, and all the other species of deer, there was much more biomass in the Northern Great Plains. And I had spent a lot of my career working overseas, almost none of it in the United States, proselytizing and trying to get people to understand what it is we're trying to do in conservation and what we're trying to bring back, realizing that in our own country, we've done a relatively poor job of that. And so I thought, is there one place in North America where the original elements are still there, if we could only reassemble that? So I got this idea of creating this American Prairie Reserve. And when I gave my talk, a woman on the plane who was a Harvard alum said, well, what do you need to get started? And I said, we've got to go buy some ranches and get some bison back. And she said, okay. So she wrote me a check for $500,000. This was, and then I went back to World Wildlife Fund and said, okay, we got to do this. And we got our CEO in the room, and don't let this happen to you, Brandy. But we cornered her, and we weren't going to let her out of the room until she said, we're going to put in another 500,000. And we held to that and then found more funds. And that became the American Prairie Reserve in 2000. That Smithsonian's done a wonderful job of providing the biology for that. And that involved, again, that rewilding of bringing bison back to that landscape, now bringing swift fox. I have one vision that's even more ambitious for that, and you can share this with the American Prairie Reserves. I think we should give the land back. I think that in a couple more years, when you've trained the staff at Fort Belknap and Fort Peck and others, this should be the first example of handing the land back to Native Americans from the American Prairie Reserve. So that's my vision, I hope. But I also saw too is that it's funny listening to the conversations and the presentations about AI, because I realized, oh, I'm in this place where AI means artificial insemination, not artificial intelligence, because most of my work now is about using AI to do something. In fact, I was just at the National Zoo. I was telling Brandy and Tony 10 days ago, testing out our new AI-embedded camera alert system that we pioneered in Africa and Asia, but now making it super cheap and super small on the elephants at the zoo to detect them in real time as they walk by. It streams to my phone a bounding box as they go by. And like, okay, none of this stuff existed. And back in 1975, we were trying to identify tigers by measuring their pug marks in the soil, and then using a hand calculator to do analysis of variance to see if we could identify individual tigers. Now we have cameras with embedded AI that detect tigers and send the alerts back to our phones in 30 seconds. So the tools are better, but the essential ingredient for conservation is what you are still providing, is finding the best possible biologists out there, hire them, get the best graduate students, have the most interesting projects that address the most critical problems for conservation. And that's the recipe for success. And it's so wonderful to see that you're continuing to do that. And on top of that, how many speakers today were women? Back in the days when I started, it was like 5 or 10% might be women. And today it's the majority. So hats off to you. That's wonderful that we have that. Thank you.
Thank you all. That was incredible. One amazing story after another. So this is a great opportunity for you folks to take advantage of this distinguished panel of guests and ask some questions. 5 minutes. We have a few questions. Let me just repeat the question. The question was for the Reconnect project, what's the biggest obstacle that you've had to deal with?
Well, fragmentation is a thing, right? In Brazil, as somebody presented, I forgot your name, sorry. Like Atlantic forest, we have less than 20% now in Brazil. So it's very difficult for you to find a patch of forest on both sides of the road. So fragmentation is a big deal for tree-dwelling species. We're conducting a study now where we show that there's almost no forest left to reconnect. So I think this would be the main obstacle for us. And also, I think there is a cultural thing in Brazil about our civil engineers. And younger civil engineers, I think they are more open to implement these solutions, for example, on roads, right? And I think we need to work a lot with them to convince them that mitigation measure is part of the road project. And fortunately, we are partnering with the Ministry of Transportation in Brazil. We are working side by side. Also, we're going to launch soon the guidelines for canopy bridge. We are creating a standard for artificial canopy bridge for the whole country, and they're going to use our engineer project for canopy bridge soon to scale up the project across Brazil. So there are obstacles, but I'm very optimistic that we're going to overcome.
Thank you. Okay, yeah. Jennifer.
I'll take it first. So it's a very good question because we usually in North America don't step in until a species becomes listed, endangered or threatened. And at that point, it's already closer to extinction and it becomes a fairly contentious issue and it costs literally hundreds of millions of dollars to, like with sage grouse or other species. And so actually we started a program called Road to Recovery, which is working on 112 species of North American birds, most of which are migratory, but not all are migratory. And these are species that are probably going to be the next species within the next 5 to 10 years that will be listed. And so we are now bringing natural science and social science together to co-create solutions to find the limiting factors and on-the-ground implementation, where we can actually do the surgical work necessary to get the maximum bang for our buck, for our hard-to-find conservation dollars, to stimulate recovery and restore populations. So we're actually trying to work on species that are non-listed prior to the point where they get to the point where they're considered for listing. We call them tipping point species. But the remarkable thing is, as I'm listening to this, and I kind of forgot all this over the last 6 years since I've been at Georgetown, the amount of pushback that I've gotten for species level work. And most of the people out there, most conservation organizations do habitat protection, pure habitat protection. And it's not species level work. And it's just kind of funny because I spent the last 5 years arguing that we have to do species level work. All species have evolved differently. They have different, different limiting factors that drive them. And if we can at some point do multiple species, great, but it requires some really intense biology, requires social science from the very get-go to really start to understand what the drivers are and how we can actually implement change. And so we're doing this organically without the listing piece, trying to bring together lots and lots of groups. In the bird world, there have already been enormous numbers of groups, 50 groups, recovery teams that have formed organically that people do voluntarily on their own time. And this is throughout the Western Hemisphere. So this is already happening because we're in the sixth mass extinction. People see this happening. And if we don't step in, we're going to see more and more extinctions. It's a good question.
Can I make 2 small reflections? One is on the biobanking, looking into the future. I think you guys have done a fantastic job. So I think we would have a lot of chance and opportunity and to grow and then lead the way and show at a global scale how things are being done. And not just the gamete part, but also the pathology and the tissue and the cells and everything else. And also the digital banking as well. The second part was towards Peter's vision for the future. On the last point, says global health. So I just wanted to see that you guys are growing strong in that field, given the fact that now we had a small group presenting with music and everything on the One Health and Zoonosis. And also we used to have Sharon Deem, who was very strong in conservation medicine, and also Alonso Aguirre, who was textbook on conservation medicine. So I think I would love to see this field grow strong because we have global partners like WHO and WOAS and FAO, and I have been doing that in the past 10, 15 years. There's so much rooms to grow and fill the gap and bridge the gap between biodiversity and health.
I guess I'll try for that, Bill. I'm hopeful that one of the new mechanisms that will emerge one of our big problems is we know what we need to do to save life on Earth. The problem is that a lot of the money. Try this one. Yeah, technology. We need more people. Is biodiversity credits may emerge as a new thing where how do we transfer this massive wealth that's in the private sector to conservation? And I think that biodiversity credits is emerging as a new tool to do that. if indeed, and it's happening too, because in Europe and in some other countries, laws are now being passed where companies will have to make sure that their supply chains are free of deforestation. You don't have to know the sources of their products. And it's a way for companies to be nature positive. I'm hoping that through that, as one mechanism at least, that if these companies need to be nature positive, then they need to be able to demonstrate what's going on in the places they're investing in to conserve. And that's going to require more people to go out and be biologists who collect that kind of data that feeds back to how well we're doing in protecting the earth. But I agree with you that this is a major problem. I think that really our challenges ahead is compounded by, as what you just pointed out about technology, as AI becomes more prominent, is how much will that replace the work of field biologists? And what will or do we have AI as a co-scientist that helps us become much more effective at what we do in the field? That's a better solution. But I think that one of the biggest challenges we have is what you just put your finger on. And I think if there was an easy solution to that, we would have already solved it.
Okay, I think we're out of time, but thank you so much. That was amazing.
Thank you, Tony. For me, this was fantastic. I have to say, it's just really, it's gratifying to have these colleagues sitting up there and talking about us like we are a resource, or we are a partner, or we have played a role in their career. And I want to thank all the speakers. I thought it was really inspiring, actually. So for the last phase of our program, we go back in time, but pretty much for the same reason, for inspiration. So we're going to be christening our new science center. It was long in the making. Yeah, we first had to move admin, then we had to renovate the place, but it's finally there. We have a beautiful new science facility, and we have decided to dedicate it to Ted Reed, who was the zoo director that started it all. So we want to invite you for this last portion. We'll go up to the Reed Center. We have the dedication ceremony up there in front of it and celebrate it. And if you want, you can take a stroll through the Reed Center and see what it looks like, talk to the scientists there. And then the shuttle bus will actually leave from up there for people to go back to their parking. But before we close here, again, I would love to thank all the speakers for their incredible talks and their preparation. Thank our alumni and friends and colleagues and the board for coming here. We were so excited to have this many guests. Thank our staff for really helping with all of this, and hope that we have another 50 years.
Just really quick, Peter's been up here all day talking, and he's the person who hasn't gotten the introductions and the overviews and the thank yous. So thank you. So much of this was based upon Peter's vision and his desire to celebrate the history, to think about the future, and to celebrate everybody who's here in this room. So the person I want to thank most right now is Dr. Peter Lamgruber. Thank you.